Hi guys, Corona Throw Summers and all that and all that and all that. If you haven't watched part one, watch part one for context. If you need even bigger context, watch the whole series. It is not a good idea to get part side of a conversation, which is exactly what we're talking about as we're going into this series, this little segment of the series, rather, called Updates, Reflections and Questions. Let's dive into the questions. This is probably going to end up being a two-part thing. Basically because I'm looking at the questions and the amount of insight we've got compared to the amount of time it's going to take. Obviously, my motto before, as I said it, is that a discussion shouldn't really have a time limit. It's important to stay on track, but if you've got something important to talk about and it's in the nature of discussion, we're entitled to have long videos. I believe entertainment warrants a short video, specifically. And there's a lot to discuss here. But also, I want to give you guys time to digest, time to go do all the stuff, and yeah, not to overload you with too much stuff in one go. So, we'll try and keep this into one, but I reckon it's going to turn into a two-parter, making this a three-part segment of updates, reflections, and questions. Let's dive in. Dive right in. Legendary. Right, okay, so what are these questions about? Well, you can see that one right there, because these questions are going to be questions that I have for all of us. As I said in the previous video, a lot of different people can relate to a lot of parts of these questions. These are questions that I would have for the government, any figure of government that I'd happen to get in front of one day. I would like to answer them, see them answer it, or see their opinion on it. And the very first question I'm going to ask is a two-sided question, even though I've only written one part of it. And that is, what was the 5G uproar about? Because the first perspective we're going to look at in the questions is the same kind of questions you're going to get for absolutely anything to do with worldwide discussion and media, which is conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to get into it too much. There's a whole video I need to make on conspiracy theories. But basically, when any kind of world event happens and there is a strong reaction of any emotion, there will always be theories on the side as to the either to the events that transpired or just generally to just how people feel about it, what the intention of the video is, etc., etc., the people in it and what they're about. You know, always. There's always a conspiracy. Now, the thing about conspiracy theories is this. It's a two-sided coin with conspiracy theories. And if you're not a balanced, fair-minded person, you're not really going to... you're going to probably totally disagree with what I say. And I'm only saying that because when I talk to people about elevating and becoming more in tune with balancing their mind, you have to be able to open yourself up to a deeper discussion and a more... far-flung discussion. What I mean by that, so it's like this. With conspiracies is a two-sided coin, as I said. What do I mean? Well, on one hand, some conspiracies, because it's become quite a buzzword nowadays, are basically things that people have independent thoughts. People have free thinking, and we love that. We admire it more because groupthink is such a terrible, dangerous type of thing to do right now, especially with social media influencing groupthink and the media influencing groupthink. Having one narrative is always the worst way because it encourages far too much censorship, as we've learned over the years. And so conspiracies can generally not always be something completely nuts and off the scale. It's just you hear the word and you automatically deflect from what anyone's going to say, but they can just be bits of information that are low-key, information that isn't often reported on. It can be sides of discussions that are not popular. It can be a conspiracy theory, or just generally something that has been not spoken about or happened so long ago, for so long, that generally speaking, it just gets brought up, and then the media narrative rather than the independent narrative pushes through. The other side of a conspiracy theory is, in fact, of course, obviously, when people channel themselves into broader, deeper discussions, they can fall down the rabbit hole. I won't go into it too much, as I say. It's far too much to go into right now, but basically, you've seen both here. And I'm interested to cover these two topics because they're bits that have facts and opinions in. That's why I brought it up. Two, yes, it's not just 5G. So what I'm going to do with these two is I'm just going to basically offer you the facts on what I know about them, and then the opinions on them, and then correlate them into why they've come up right now. So, what was the 5G uproar about? Let's start off with that, because it's completely relative, not only to my country, but to my city, Birmingham. I live in Birmingham, in the West Midlands in England. And I gotta tell you something. Well, I'm living in Birmingham right now. Long story on that. So, gotta tell you something. In my country, 5G has been making a move to be installed. And I immediately rallied against it. I did that because of what I know of the facts of the origins of where 5G started. And if you're going to have a discussion on 5G, you need to know your history. I'll make a completely separate thing on 5G and technology in the future. But I'll give you some points. So, 5G was developed, the technology for 5G was developed in Israel. What are we talking about when we talk about 5G? Well, let's go in the timeline very quickly. Do you remember, anybody who was born 90s backwards, do you remember 2G? No? Of course you do. Well, if you were, I say yeah, but you don't, the actual origins of 2G rather than what was on our phones. Let me go into it. So, I'm going to cross those legs. So do you remember being on a train or being in a car and going down the motorway or just on a long journey, and then you look into the fields and you see these massive, huge towers, like the one in the picture there, as long as the brightness doesn't kill it off. I'm sorry about the brightness, I do apologise. But they're 100-metre high towers. And they have like the cables going across them in a kind of that shape going across, and it go on for miles and miles and miles. Well, this was where we had our 2G, and basically once upon a time in the olden days, you'd have your wires that would carry on like that for miles and miles and miles until they hit a city radius, and then they would go down into the ground, underground, and then all the way up to people's houses, where they'd go through your buildings and then into your home phone. Your home phone would be connected to your internet. Of course, it hasn't changed too much. Right now, I know people are very aware of it, but fiber optics versus that kind of technology back there is where we're at. And basically, that was 2G, and 2G was like that because it was far away from people. You weren't harmed by any of the effects. You know, it was big enough, obviously, because of the size more than anything else of the towers. But that was 2G, and then as we moved forward towards 3G, you started seeing the lampposts on streets. And there would be block radius lampposts. So there wouldn't be a lamppost in every street. There's a lamppost for every few blocks. Or maybe like in one area you might find like, I don't know, like say 6-7 lampposts. And the reason why is because basically, without trying to stretch this out too long with 5G, the higher the G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, the higher the G, the closer it needs to be to your house. And it needs to be like that because even though you get more power and more quickened speeds, the waves that come from each G as the G's go up, the waves are shorter, which means that the signal is shorter from where it's coming from to where you get it. And so even though it's more powerful, it has to be closer to your house for you to receive the signal. Long stories on that. So that's the facts of 5G. And here's the topic. So Israel developed 5G technology. They sold it off and then banned it in their country. And they did this because they found out the toxic effects that 5G was having on people's health, radiation. There is a documentary on it. I haven't got it to hand. I do apologise. I'm still searching for it. But there is a documentary that was made on it. I believe it was to do with schools. Either way, that's what happened. And obviously lots of Western and Eastern powers took hold of 5G. And one by one, they started assimilating them. And in America is where my next bit of it comes on. America adapted the technology, and they had 5G incorporated into their airports. I know there's a few other places, but this is where this is the factual story I know. So the TSA? TSA workers. There was a whistleblower from the TSA that came forward and told a story about how they used 5G to x-ray people's baggage in. and persons as they were going through the airport, as you would, to make sure you haven't got any hazardous goods. And apparently, because that was used by 5G, these officers would be exposed to 5G for a very large extended amount of time. And the whistleblow was the fact that all of these workers were getting sick, and they were getting sick with radiation poisoning and cancer. And it got to a point where so many of them were getting sick that the company then ushered a gag order or some kind of silencing method where they weren't allowed to talk about it, and then laid them all off, I believe. And then something, either way, I don't really know how it ended, but that right there was my kind of first more in-depth story. What I knew beforehand was what they did. I believe it might have been 3 or 4G. I don't know what the G was, but either way, they started incorporating these street sign Gs. Street sign Gs. They started incorporating these street corner, what are they called? Lampposts. I'm trying to think of the actual word for it. Be a bit more professional with it. Towers. Right, street side towers. And people started recording them. Why did they start recording them? Well, because there's a device that measures radio frequency, RF, devices that measure radiation amounts and radio frequency amounts. And they started taking them to the streets and filming themselves, recording it. And why they did that was because they found that the huge amounts of radiation were coming from these towers that were on the street corners. And they were trying to, sort of blow the lid on it and say, look, this isn't good for our health. Regulations, of course, you know what governments are like with regulations. They kind of said what they needed to say and nothing got done about it. But people started putting wire mesh on their windows to block it coming in. I won't get into it. All of this stuff, But between that that I saw and that I told you about the TSA and knowing about Israel and stuff, I made a petition on 5G. To Parliament. I actually made a real petition. I will put in the description of this video the petition that was signed by over 200 scientists worldwide. I believe it's 200 is the number off the top of my head. Very accredited scientists all around the world, all different fields, all saying no to 5G based on the harmful effects it has on the body. Basically calling for more study into it. We're not just saying no 5G whatsoever, but we're saying that yes, we are very well aware of the effects of 5G. And so I made a petition for it. It didn't go through under very strange circumstances. I won't bother with it, but there was a petition signed. But the government over here did a bit of a sneaky one. They basically commented on the effects of 5G on your mobile rather than the effects of 5G on the sidewalk. And it was very strange what followed in the coronavirus. Let's get into that. But first, I got to briefly talk on that because obviously people started taking to the streets here and setting them on fire. Questionable as to whether it was sensible to have fires and electrical fires around people's houses, but nonetheless, we'll get into that. Yes, that little jug thing. Mason jar. I did it on purpose. New World Order. There was a New World Order signs. The people have been shouting about New World Order. I do know a lot about New World Order agendas. I'm not going to go into that either because I don't want to distract from this. But basically, some notable figures have come out and spoken very sensibly about some New World Order tactics, which are very real. Please don't shy yourself away and just think that it's nonsense. David Icke came out and did his speech, which, by the way, even though he's been discredited by that usual rationale. That people always do. You know when someone comes out and they're not exactly liked by the media, well, they'll always default to the most controversial thing about them. He's been discredited as the guy who believes in lizards, blah blah blah. Look, you don't have to agree with everyone's opinions and everything. I don't agree with people being lizards, but David Icke, he is a very profound person when it comes to understanding global economics and hierarchical societies. And the talk he did, he's been doing for years, 30 plus years. He said he's been talking about this. He's not lying. I remember growing up and hearing about his stuff. Obviously, we don't have to agree on everything, but he's not the only person. There are people worldwide who do this all the time, talking on global economics. But nonetheless, these two things were coming up. And why I've touched on them isn't just to be informative, but it's because they both do. They are both two interesting points of discussion, and when we talk about what's warranted as worth talking about, yes, fine, they don't directly correlate to coronavirus, but they do have their own roles to play. And why do I say that? Well, because it leads us to our next question, which was, why is the non-essential work of 5G installation allowed to continue? And this is my point with 5G. Because however you feel about it, wherever the discussion about it, doesn't really matter. It's not important. Is it contributing to people dying? I doubt it. Because in case you didn't understand, first and foremost, sorry, just turn that off. First and foremost, radiation poisoning takes quite a while to happen. Not a long time, but enough to, it has to be about. 5G has barely even popped up on the streets. They've barely started, putting the poles down. So no. Would people get radiation sickness from 3G and 4G? Probably. This would have happened ages ago, though. Yes, the symptoms are similar, but no, this is an actual virus. Let's get real, guys. Is it a concern? Of course it is. Because I looked at it and I saw that they closed all the non-essential work, and I looked around and I thought to myself, why is it? Because they mentioned it in an article. On the side, they casually mentioned that building was going to be on construction, which is fine. There's essential construction work like water, gas, electric, these types of things that are going to be important to people's health. But for some reason, they've carried on building 5G, which has no importance whatsoever right now. And you can hear the reports that talk about how it's essential to telecommunications between services, but it's really not. Because anybody who's educated will go, or even just generally logical will go, hold on a second, we haven't got 5G yet. And none of our telecommunications have crashed at all. There's not been an article in the last year that said, oh, people can't communicate anymore and blah, 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 we need to have 5G, definitely. It was a marketing thing. We talked about being innovative and having being innovative in internet, the revolutionising the internet, whatever. And so I find it very interesting that of all the things that have been allowed to carry on, they've just carried on putting in 5G when that's a waste of workforce, and it's not going to have any effect. Us having it now, it's not going to help for coronavirus because the telecommunications we've got, yes, fine, it'll be more powerful, but no, it's not essential. 4G is doing us just fine, So I find that very quizzical. And so people had a right to complain about why 5G was carrying on. And they have a complaint to feel away about 5G. Setting fires about it, probably not. But I would rationalise that if you're, and I'm being fair here, I'm just being open, that if you're in lockdown and you can't protest on the street because no one's allowed outside, and you can't voice your opinion because nobody's really listening about 5G, then urgent measures might be on some people's brains. However, I probably wouldn't I definitely would not set poles on fire. That is really, really silly. Maybe you want to break, if you feel so passionate about it, maybe you'll break lockdown to, I don't know, do a human chain around the site that they're building 5G. Do you know what I mean? That would have been my... I'm not condoning, by the way. No. But I'm just saying, I'm offering an alternative opinion of if you were passionate about it, that's what you would have done. Of course, obviously, people would have blagged on about isolation methods and transferring germs and stuff. But, at the end of the day, it would have been a much more sensible solution than electrical fires that could potentially kill people. Anyway, let's breeze past that because we're on 20-minute mark. And this is going to definitely be a two-parter because that's only one question.